All right, let's get right into it. Today we're talking about a massive figure in Persian mythology, King Jamshid. I mean, this guy is a true legend, a builder of civilizations, a bringer of a golden age, and he's at the heart of a really violent and fascinating mystery that we're going to try to piece together.
And this, right here, is the central puzzle of his story. On one side, you have this glorious reign, a utopia so perfect that for 300 years people literally did not die or suffer. But on the other side, a horrifying end. He's hunted down for a century and then brutally sawn in half. So how does a king who achieved absolute perfection fall so catastrophically? That is the big question we're tackling.
To really get the tragedy of the fall, you first have to understand the incredible heights he fell from. So let's start with the good times, the amazing achievements that defined Jamshid's golden age.
Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. The great poet Ferdowsi describes this era as a time of complete freedom from all suffering. No death, no sorrow, no evil. It was, for all intents and purposes, a perfect world, all built and held together by this one king.
And this wasn't some kind of magic trick. He built this utopia piece by piece over centuries. You can see it here. For 50 years, he's teaching people to forge weapons. The next 50, he's inventing fine fabrics. Then he organizes all of society into these distinct classes: priests, warriors, farmers, artisans, giving everyone a role and a purpose. He introduces architecture, discovers jewels and perfumes, pushes medicine so far that it conquers death, and even builds ships to sail the seas. He is literally inventing civilization from the ground up.
And all of this leads to his crowning achievement. At the very peak of his power on the first day of spring, he has this incredible jeweled throne built. He then commands the demons, the divs, to lift him straight up into the sky where he sits, shining just like the sun. The people on the ground are just blown away, and they name that day Nowruz, or the New Day. It becomes the Persian New Year, his most enduring legacy.
But of course, this perfect world, this golden age, it couldn't last forever. It all came crashing down in a really sudden and violent way. So now, let's dig into the most famous version of why it all went so wrong.
And that's really the question, isn't it? I mean, you've conquered death. You've built a perfect society. What could possibly bring you down from that? Well, according to the great epic, the Shahnameh, it was one single, fatal flaw.
And there it is, the moment it all turns. After all his success, Jamshid looks at everything he's created and totally forgets where his power came from. He gathers his nobles and basically says, "I did all this. I arranged the world. Who else could be king but me?" In that moment, he declares himself a god.
Now that declaration had an immediate and devastating consequence. He lost his farah. The farah is this, think of it as a divine glory, a special grace from God that gives a king the right and the power to rule. By claiming he was a god himself, Jamshid showed ingratitude, and that divine light just, poof, abandoned him. He was left totally exposed.
The second that farah was gone, his kingdom fell into absolute chaos. His own people turned on him and actually invited a monstrous foreign tyrant, Zahak, to come take the throne. Jamshid had to flee, and he spent the next 100 years as a fugitive, until he was finally caught and, by Zahak's order, sawn in two. A truly brutal end for a sin of pride.
Okay, but here's where the story gets really complicated. Because that neat moral tale of pride coming before the fall, it isn't the only version out there. What if Jamshid wasn't a sinner at all? What if he was a good king who was just betrayed?
So you have the Shahnameh from around the year 1000, which is very clear. Jamshid's sin was hubris, plain and simple. But then you have the Kushnameh from only about a century later, and it says the complete opposite. It claims Jamshid never sinned, that he was a devout worshiper of God right up to the very end. So, we have two major texts with two totally contradictory stories.
In this other telling, Jamshid is a tragic hero. His downfall has nothing to do with a personal flaw. It's just blamed on bad luck, on the turning of the cruel sky. He's a good king who suffers a terrible, completely undeserved fate. This just makes the whole thing even more mysterious. Was he a sinner who got what was coming to him, or a good man destroyed by destiny?
So to get to the bottom of this, we have to go back even further in time, past these medieval epics, to the original Zoroastrian scriptures that are centuries older. And it's here that we find the earliest ideas of a sinful Jamshid, but the sin is something completely different.
This is so fascinating because you can actually watch the story evolve. In the oldest text, the Gathas, his original sin wasn't pride at all. It was that he introduced meat-eating to humanity, which ended a kind of primordial vegetarian paradise. Then, in a later text, the sin changes again. Now it's not about food, it's about speaking a lie. That's the act that causes his divine glory, his farah, to leave him. So this whole idea of him declaring himself a god seems to be a much, much later addition to the story.
So, which story is the true one? The proud king, the tragic victim, the liar, or the guy who ruined paradise with a steak dinner? Well, the answer is that they all are. His story shows us that myths aren't static historical records. They're living stories that change to reflect what's important to the people telling them.
Jamshid's story actually fits into this powerful, universal pattern you see in myths all over the world, the punished benefactor. Just look at the comparison to the Greek myth of Prometheus. Both of them gave incredible gifts to humanity. Jamshid gave civilization, Prometheus gave fire and knowledge. Both of them overstepped their bounds and defied a higher power. And both were punished with these horrific, unending torments. It's a really powerful story about the risks that come with progress.
And that's why all these contradictions in Jamshid's story aren't a flaw. They're the whole point. Each era rewrote the myth to fit its own values. For the ancient Zoroastrians, the biggest sins might have been about diet or telling the truth. But later, for Ferdowsi's era of powerful kings, the absolute worst sin a ruler could commit was hubris, defying God. The hero's story becomes a mirror, reflecting the culture that's telling it.
So in the end, the paradox of Jamshid isn't really a puzzle to be solved with one right answer. It's a reflection of our own changing ideas about power, about sin, and about destiny. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. What do the changing stories of our own heroes, both ancient and modern, reveal about us?